The stereotypical image of schizophrenia or psychosis or schizoaffective or any reason someone might be psychotic is typically like that homeless bum who's like ranting and raving and talking to himself in the streets, or like person who is just like streaking naked, or someone who is violent, someone who attacks people. And you know what? That's often not the case. For me, most of my episodes have been, being really far gone, like way, way far gone, where I am completely out of touch with reality and I have no sense of what is real and what is not. But for some people with schizophrenia or any other psychotic disorder, they do have like some sort of grounding in reality. They can like tell that they're both like psychotic and in reality, and they can function to an extent. They can go about their day and they know that they have hallucinations and they're aware. And that was my first episode. And a lot of people, because they don't know that that also is a type of psychosis, just kind of disregard that type. During my first episode, I had delusions and I had paranoia and I had some mild hallucinations. So I would typically like be alone in a room and hear chatter and people walking across the room as if I was in like a busy coffee shop. I would hear like engines revving from cars even when I was inside. I thought cars were following me and I could swear I'd see them behind me, but when I do a double take, they weren't there. But like, I knew they were there. My delusions got to be kind of violent, where I thought I had killed my dog and I thought I'd carved into my face, and I knew logically that that couldn't be true, but I still had this belief that it happened and I had to like look in the mirror to be sure. And I decided, I should probably go to the hospital. They didn't believe me when I got there, and they just kind of put me on some meds and played along. And I actually saw the hospital records, and it said something like patient um, presents as psychotic, and they put it in quotes. And I just thought that was so like dismissive, because that sentence carried into all my other medical records through all my other psychotic states where I was completely like lost in it. It wasn't like psychosis. It was actually like a valid thing. And I would tell people in the hospital like I can logically still hear cars revving in this room on the third floor. And they'd be like, so is that what it's like being psychotic? I'd be like yes. And that's why they didn't believe me, because I was aware. So I just say this because I think that this like representation of schizophrenia and other psychotic disorders is like absolutely wrong. It is a spectrum, and you can be at any place on the spectrum and still have like valid psychosis. And you don't need to be that guy ranting and raving in the streets to like actually be disabled by it. Some people take medication and their symptoms still don't go away, and they might get better, but they don't go away. Luckily for me, my medications completely like take it away. But you know what? Let's just like take a moment to recognize that not everyone's psychosis looks the same. So I have schizoaffective disorder and I have episodes of psychosis. My episodes are contained in the time that it takes for me to get medical intervention. So however long that takes, my episodes will last. Once I have that medical intervention and I stabilize, I'm good. No more psychosis. I know for some people, they live in psychosis constantly, but for me, it's episodes. My worst psychotic episode was about 9 months long, and about 5 months into that episode, I did go to the hospital and was given medication, and it was like another 4 months before I actually was no longer psychotic, like to the point where I still had some recovery ahead of me, but I wasn't hallucinating or having delusions anymore. While psychosis is incredibly difficult to live with, the recovery can be just as bad. And for me, it was absolutely grueling. even though the episode itself was only about 9 months, it took about 18 months for me to get most of my cognitive ability back. And there are some things that just never came back. Like I have permanent memory loss, and I had to relearn a lot of very basic things coming out of a completely catatonic state. So by catatonia, I mean that I was unable to move at times. I would just be stuck in like rigid positions, and a lot of it was being unable to speak. And that was a very interesting experience to have as an adult. For a long time, I was only able to answer yes or no questions. That was in large part because I had like a complete absence of thought, which if you didn't know that was possible, it totally is, and it totally sucks. I can't even begin to describe what it's like to not have a single thought in your head for months at a time, because I would need to have the thoughts to articulate that. What I can say though is that in chunks of time, it took me about 4 months to relearn how to completely form sentences and talk. And it took me a couple months past that to completely get back like reading comprehension skills, learning how to read a string of words and then a sentence and then a paragraph and then pages, and I had to chip into that. Also relearning like my vocabulary was one of the longest things that came back, because I don't know why, but my intelligence was shot. And for about 18 months, I really grasped at words and had a hard time thinking of what to say. These cognitive skills, even motor skills, like I'm an artist and I had to relearn how to draw, and that took about a year. And that was dedicated effort. I really had to put in a lot of effort to get these things back. And it's a miracle today that I can even talk to you. So while psychosis in itself can be terrifying, exhilarating, exhausting because of the constant ups and downs, as much as it can be engrossing to experience, the recovery phase is like the opposite of that. It is long and arduous. It can be dull. It is painstaking effort to make minimal progress over a drastically long period of time. And without much help, because I didn't really have people in my life familiar with psychosis then, I was teaching myself how to do basic things without any concept of what that meant. My experience didn't have to be that painful. It absolutely should not have happened like that the way it did. There was so much loss in that time, so much danger that happened to me, so many huge violations of my basic human rights. I was violated by the police, by a man who married me against my will. It did not have to be that bad. I have people who support me today, but that wasn't the case back then. I have people today who are aware of my condition, who know what it looks like, who know what to do in the case of an emergency. And back then, it was all on me. I was all on my own. And in such a vulnerable state, there was no way I could have protected myself or gotten myself out of it. It is by sheer dumb luck and a delusion that sent me on a trail that I was able to get to a hospital and get help. Now, my last psychotic episode, completely different. Very short-lived. Very mild. I had a partner who had heard the stories, had never seen it for himself, but when I started acting very strangely and he recognized that this was not how I typically act, he got me help, and I was hospitalized pretty shortly into it, only a few months in, and I recovered, and I didn't have to relearn any words, and I didn't have to relearn how to talk because I had the proper care that I needed all along. I guess this is just a cautionary tale. I don't know why I'm telling you any of this. Most people don't know about this side of my life. They've never seen me like that, and they don't know how hard it was to get myself back. Do I ever get a break from psychosis? Short answer, no. Long answer, it's complicated. My episodes are episodic, and the episodes are like one long stretch of time until I get on medications or have them adjusted. And those long stretches of time have been as long as over a year. I'm not exactly sure. And when I'm in that state, I really don't ever come out of it. It's a really heightened state to be in. It is very dramatic and exhilarating and draining to live like that for over a year every single day. Now, you could say that I'm in a break right now because when I'm not psychotic, I am totally fine aside from other stuff. And I don't have any symptoms if I'm properly medicated. And it takes a long time to get to that point. But once I'm there, I can coast like that indefinitely. Just like if I'm not medicated, I can coast in psychosis indefinitely. Maybe I will continue on this winning streak. Maybe I won't. I like to hope that this break I'm in will last the rest of my life and I will never experience psychosis again. I also have a little voice in my head that says, "Don't get too cocky. You never know." It has happened under some, unusual circumstances where I shouldn't have fallen into that state, but my doctors weren't so great. That being said, I do have one memory of clarity in a psychotic state. I don't know if that happened other times, but I have a very clear memory of being at home and sitting in a field and just kind of taking everything in and realizing, like, for a moment that I wasn't okay and that something was happening to me and I didn't know what it was, but I could tell something was wrong, and I kind of grieved for myself because I didn't know if it would end and I desperately wanted it to end. And I just had like a good 15-minute window of sitting there, finally not being in the crazy upheaval of hallucinations and delusions and just feeling like I needed this. I want this to end. And that was about 5 months in. 5 months of not coming out of it at all. So I guess you could say there are breaks. I know that when I've had less severe episodes and I've kind of been like aware, I've had more stretches of like at least passing as normal and kind of having my wits about me. But when it's really severe, it's fewer and far between. And honestly, my head is so foggy from everything that happened and I don't know what was real sometimes that I'm not really sure if I had that very many times. How does it feel to be out of reality? Where is your mind? This is such a great question because I think sometimes I use confusing language when I say things like I'm gone or I'm out there because, where did you go? Like, what do you mean you're not here with me if we're having a conversation? And the truth is that even though I might be in the same room as someone, I am actually sometimes in a completely different world. And I really do mean a completely different world because my mind will take me into different realities and I will be traveling between dimensions or jumping through portals, or I will be in hell, I will be in outer space, I will be stuck in an infinite time loop for infinity, which I can feel infinity, and not something you can describe, but something you can actually experience. And in these other worlds and these other realities and offshoots of reality and splinters of time, those worlds and experiences to me are very real. Even though I might look like just a person in front of you, to me, I am literally seeing entire scenery around me. I am literally looking into the galaxy, and it goes far beyond my horizon point. It is like completely being immersed in a virtual reality game, at least to me. And everything I hear isn't coming from inside my head, it's coming from all around me. Everything I'm experiencing is so real, it's like I'm breathing, and there's nothing you can do to tell me that it's not actually happening. So my mind is everywhere but in front of you, and I could be standing right in front of you, but my mind is like way off in the cosmos or way down in hell. It could be anywhere at any given moment. Sometimes I'll stay in these different realities for long stretches of time or just in quick spurts, but it is constantly changing, ever evolving. Very terrifying, very exciting, very beautiful. So many ways to describe it, and none of them will ever really convey what that's like. So I guess that's what it's like when I'm not in reality. I am basically just in an entirely different experience. To me, it is a reality, but it is not the same as yours. And that's where my mind goes. It goes off on a little explorative trip. Do you still feel present when you're having no soul? I really love this question for a couple of reasons. First being that even the word present alone is kind of exciting for my mind to grapple with, because what I've kind of sussed up trying to think of the answer is that present when I'm psychotic is just one long sustained moment, and that moment is constantly changing, but I don't really have a perception of time. I don't know if it's been months or seconds. I don't know if it's nighttime or daytime. And being present through all of that is just like holding your breath, waiting for the roller coaster ride to stop. So yes, I do feel entirely present, and I am like completely immersed in what I'm experiencing. But maybe for you, that's not exactly the answer you were looking for, because in the sense of being in a room full of people trying to have a conversation, no, I am not present. I am absolutely not there. And I can try to have a conversation, but I will be like interpreting everything you say as some coded language that's feeding back to me that the government is trying to abduct me for experiments. So I'm not really with you. Now, the other part of this question that I really like is the concept of having no soul. And I kind of feel like being in psychosis, you are nothing but soul. Like your ego, whatever the forefront of you filters reality to you, it's gone. Also, a lot of hallucinations and delusions are very spiritual in nature, and I've had so many huge spiritual experiences, or if you want, you could call them like spiritual awakenings while psychotic. I kind of liken it to an ayahuasca trip, because people will use that hallucinogenic drug to have a spiritual experience, and I just do that off of drugs. So the point at which I'd say I don't feel like I have a soul anymore is actually when I'm recovering from psychotic and I'm in that catatonic state, learning how to talk again, like I spoke about in another video. Because in that point, there is like, if I am gone when I'm in a psychotic state, I'm traveling. When I'm gone in a recovery state, I'm like a ghost. I'm just a shell, and there is nothing happening up here. I also tend to completely doubt any of the spiritual experiences I had in psychosis once I realize I have psychosis, and then I'm not like that anymore. And I think to myself, well, that was all brain chemistry. None of that was real. Those spiritual experiences were a lie. And I actually tend to become very nihilistic. After having had the experience of being an entirely spiritual being and then becoming incredibly despaired in spirituality, I think I've kind of found a middle ground where I think I have a soul, and I think my soul is doing a pretty good job at what it does, and there's not as much conflict in that belief anymore. Not sure if that answers your question. I kind of feel like that answer got away from me, honestly, but I hope you liked what I had to say, and I hope maybe that like gave you a little more insight into what it's like. What sort of things did you experience in psychosis? So I love this question, and I'm going to use it as an opportunity to talk about some of the weirder things that have happened to me, because when people think of psychosis, they tend to think of hearing voices and paranoia. And you know, the mind is capable of so much more than that. You would not even believe. And some of the experiences I've had, I've just never heard other people talk about. And I would love to know if other people share these experiences and what that was like for them, because it's absolutely wild what your mind can do. The first thing that came to mind for me was this sound. And it wasn't necessarily a sound that I heard so much as a sound that I felt. It was like it was coming from inside my body, from the very core of me, like it was completely coming from all of my molecules made up together in this huge blast of a sound. It wasn't outside of me. That was the only experience I've had where a sound wasn't outside of me. And it was, if I could translate it, it would probably sound something like wow, like a reverberation. And when it happened so suddenly, it's almost like it didn't happen at all, maybe in a split second, but the experience of it shot me out into the universe, all the way to the end of the universe and back. And in that time, it was just endless. Like it was over a lifetime of time that I experienced in the universe before I came back
and realized it had been like less than a second. So that was really crazy. And that kind of leads me to my second one. Time makes no sense. Time makes no sense. And I have no like perception of time anymore when I go psychotic. And sometimes that means that I can't tell whether it's day or night. If it's dark outside, I might just be in hell, so I don't know if it's day or night. Sometimes that means I could have been psychotic for months and I don't know if it's even been a day because I have no perception of time. Along those lines, though, I can kind of feel infinity. That's what I like to think is I know what it feels like to be in an infinite moment because with that noise, for instance, it was a split second that lasted over a lifetime. So I can kind of feel like the absence of time and indefinite time at the same time. I think that anyone who has like those time perceptions might relate, but I don't know if they'd necessarily call it infinity. As far as visual hallucinations go, I kind of have like two different experiences with that, where some of the hallucinations are hyper realistic and there is no telling that this isn't really a person or an object, and it looks solid almost as if I can touch it. Other times, hallucinations will be almost like projected onto the environment around me, and that can kind of be like misinterpreting an object, say looking at a chair and the shadow falling on the chair and the folds of the arms on the chair to me look like a person sitting cross-legged, and I can't see through the hallucination to the chair itself, but in hindsight I realized it was made up of my scenery. And a very, very specific hallucination that I have is so subtle that you might not even notice it at first, and that is just when people have completely blacked out eyes. When that happens, typically it's the only thing I'm hallucinating at the time. So I'll be in a room and it'll look just like how it normally looks to anyone else. And the person I'm talking to will look just like themselves. And, you know, by all appearances, everything is real until I make eye contact with them and I see that their eyes are completely blacked out and there's no color, there's no whites to them. They're just glossy and black, and it freaks me out every time, but it is so subtle. Absolutely the subtlest thing I've ever hallucinated. The last thing I want to say is that even though the things that happened to me technically never did actually happen, they have very real consequences, very, very real effects. For instance, I've been pregnant, like in a delusional state, but I've never been pregnant. And I have formed bonds with unborn children that I had, and I've never met them, and they never were. I've also developed trauma from hallucinations and delusions of being tortured, being on fire, and that's something that I have to work on in therapy, even though it never happened. Psychosis is basically what happens when your mind pushes itself to the limit. It is unthinkable, indescribable, and I try my best to translate it to people through words, but realistically, I will never even come like a tenth close to describing how that actually feels. I hope that helps. I could say a million more things. Those are just the weirdest ones I could think of.